The 2025 Spanish Grand Prix was shaping up to be a bit of a snooze fest. That was until a late safety car being brought out for the Mercedes at Kimi Antonelli deciding to blow up. And then Red Bull Racing decided to play a Ferrari disaster class in their strategy. At the restart, Max was quickly overtaken by Charles Leclerc, and into turn 1, George Russell tried an overtake that was never really on. Then Max was told by the pit wall that he needs to let George Russell back through, a decision that Max did not agree with, and as a result crashed into the side of George Russell. Max was then slapped with a 10-second penalty for the collision as well as 3 penalty points on his licence, meaning he's now on 11, only 1 away from a race ban. But the big question is, was the penalty justified, or did Max even get off lightly? So what we're going to do today is take a look at a few similar incidents to what happened this weekend and what sort of penalties were handed out, and we can discuss this in a nice polite manner with no threat of violence. The first incident I want to take a look at is between Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton at the 2017 Baku Grand Prix. This is the most recent example that I could think of a car intentionally driving into another. On lap 19 of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, behind the safety car, Lewis Hamilton in P1, Sebastian Vettel just behind in P2. Coming out of turn 15, Sebastian Vettel claims that Lewis Hamilton brake tested him, and as a result Seb crashed into the back of Lewis. Now I don't know if there was an investigation into the brake testing allegation. I don't think that there was. I think it was just Lewis trying to back up the pack. But after this, Seb drove up alongside Lewis and crashed into the side of him. Now this was a much lighter touch than what we saw at the Spanish Grand Prix, so bear that in mind when I tell you that Sebastian Vettel got a 10-second stop and go penalty for the collision. So if you compare these two incidents, you could say that Max kind of got off lightly. A 10-second stop and go is more like a 20-second, 25-second penalty compared to Max's 10. But this was done behind the safety car, so there's maybe some consideration for that. It also took the stewards up to lap 30 to decide what penalties should be handed out, so there was likely much debate around which penalties should be given to Sebastian Vettel. Next up, let's head all the way back to the 1997 European Grand Prix held at Jerez, also in Spain. Going into the season finale of the 1997 season, Michael Schumacher led the championship by a single point over Canadian Jacques Villeneuve, and because there was already a lot of controversy around how Schumacher won his first title in 1994 by sort of crashing into Damon Hill, before the race Max Mosley, then president of the FIA, promised that he would hand out penalties if any driver was trying to influence the outcome of the championship. Basically, if you crash on purpose, you're going to get disqualified. So on lap 47 of that race, Villeneuve was closing down on Schumacher fast. Villeneuve then throws a move up the inside of Michael Schumacher. Michael checks his mirrors, sees exactly where Villeneuve is, and just turns in on him. And Martin Brundle immediately calls it in the commentary, saying, "You've hit the wrong part of him, my friend."
You hit the wrong part of him, my friend.
Martin knew straight away what Schumacher was trying to do, take Villeneuve out of the race so that he can win the championship. Unfortunately for Schumacher, this didn't really work out the way he intended. Villeneuve carried on the race, finishing in P3, winning the championship, whereas Schumacher was stuck beached in the gravel trap. Quite surprisingly, the race stewards actually didn't investigate the crash. They determined that it was just a racing incident and took no further action against Schumacher. But later in the year, Schumacher was called for a disciplinary hearing with the FIA, and as a result, Schumacher was disqualified from the 1997 championship, losing his P2 finish. Immediately after the race, Schumacher didn't take any accountability for this and even claimed that Villeneuve was in the wrong. But after reviewing the race footage and probably having the adrenaline out of his body a bit, Schumacher realised that he was in the wrong, even stating in an interview years later that if he could go back and change parts of his career, he would do it, and that is definitely something he would change. But knowing Michael Schumacher, he probably means he would go back and hit him in the right place this time. And finally, let's take a look back at the 2021 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. On lap 37 of the Saudi GP, Lewis Hamilton tried to move around the outside of turn 1 on Max Verstappen. Obviously Max wants to stay ahead, so he brakes very late going into the corner. As a result of this, Max did not make the corner in turn 1, so he left the track, gained an advantage, so the team told him to give the position up to Lewis Hamilton. But Max was told to do this strategically, basically meaning to play chicken with the DRS going into the final corner. And it's because of these DRS chicken games that the two drivers came together. Now looking back at this, it's very obvious what Max was trying to do. He was going to give the position to Lewis just before the final corner so that Max could get DRS down the next straight and breeze past Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis Hamilton, being the experienced driver that he is, knew exactly what Max was doing and didn't want to play those games. Max Verstappen slows down to let Lewis by. Lewis doesn't want to get by, so they're both driving very slowly, and when Max notices that Lewis is just behind him, he brake tests Lewis, causing Lewis Hamilton to drive into the back of Max Verstappen. Max then decides to floor it and drive off into the sunset. Now this incident was completely avoidable by both drivers, and I think fault is partly at both of their doors, but the FIA did deem that Max was more at fault, so he was the driver penalised. At the time, there were a lot of fans claiming that Lewis was at fault for this, which I do sort of understand. If you just look at the footage, it does sort of look like Lewis just drives straight straight into the back of Max, but the telemetry that was released after the race proves that Max Verstappen was just brake testing Lewis. Verstappen was handed 2 penalties for that race, the first one for leaving the track and gaining his advantage, which he got 5 seconds for, and then a 10-second penalty for causing a collision with Lewis Hamilton. But because of how quick Max was that year, the penalties didn't even affect his race position, which I think is a bit of an issue in and of itself. I mean, maybe a penalty should always be a penalty, but that's a video for a different day. So now let's take a look at this weekend's incident between Max Verstappen and George Russell. Now, the first thing that I want to clear up is the incident in turn 1 between George and Max. George's move into turn 1 was a late lunge and he was not in control of the car. Max should have never been told to give up the position. Should George have been given a penalty for this? It was a pretty minor touch, and I don't think that we should start handing out penalties for every tiny bit of contact between drivers. I don't want to see that over-policing of racing. And since Max stayed ahead of George and there didn't seem to be any damage to Verstappen's car, I think it's fair that George just had to stay behind Max. But what I find really confusing about this is how Red Bull Racing decided to deal with it. To get one thing out of the way quickly, the decision to pit for the hard tyres was the correct choice. I've seen a lot of people saying that Red Bull should have just not pitted Max and left him out on the medium tyres. That way he would have track position over the other drivers. But when everyone else had already pitted for new tyres, and with such high degradation because of the heat at the Spanish Grand Prix, Max would have dropped like a stone. We saw this from other drivers who decided not to pit. They dropped back so fast, so Max pitting for hards was the correct call. It's just unfortunate for Max that all he had left was a set of hard tyres which don't fire up as quick as the softs and mediums would. But obviously Max doesn't have this full picture while he sat in the cockpit, so he was very annoyed at the decision to pit. This is strike 1. And then coming out of the final corner at the restart, Max has to make a huge correction due to his rear end stepping out. This is strike 2. Charles Leclerc then comes flying past him down on the straight and giving him a little bit of a tap on the way. That's strike 3. Then, as we said earlier, George hits into the side of him in turn 1, strike 4. And then, for some bizarre reason, GP comes on the radio to say that Max needs to give the position up to George. This is strike 5. And at this point, you can literally see the steam coming out of Max Verstappen's helmet. And honestly, we can't really blame Max for feeling this way. Remember, this has all happened in the space of like half a lap. Throughout the entire race, Max was driving brilliantly and was on for a P3 finish. And this is very typical of Max Verstappen. He always extracts 100% out of any car he's given. So try and put yourself in his shoes. He's been driving P3 the entire race, and then suddenly he gets a tank slapper, overtaken by Charles, hit by George, who, don't forget, he already doesn't like, and then the team tell him that he's in the wrong and needs to give up a place. This is when Mad Max returns. And obviously what happens, happens. Now, I really don't know if Max was always intending to drive into the side of George. He did say after the 2023 Baku sprint race to expect the same next time. A bit of a threat that he's going to crash into George next time he's given the opportunity to. I don't think that's the case. I think it was just like a momentary lapse of judgment for Max, and in his anger just drove into the side of George. And it is very obvious that Max did this intentionally. The fact that he didn't even speak about it in interviews, he had no defense for what he'd done. The same for Christian Horner. Christian was asked to speak on the subject and he wouldn't even give an interview, which is about the most guilty thing that you can do. And I've got to say, I think that George handled himself very well in the post-race interviews. George spoke very, very highly of Max, complimenting his driving, said that he's so good he doesn't need to do these things. And I completely agree. Max is probably the best driver in Formula 1 right now, so he doesn't need to be doing these sorts of things. I don't know what Max was hoping to happen. Like, did he hope that George would spin out and he would keep the P4? Like, I don't know what he was trying to do. It's obvious that Max was going to get a penalty for doing it, so I really don't know what he was hoping for. He obviously got hit with that 10-second penalty, dropping him all the way down to P10, so he still scores a single point, but Max could still fight for this championship, and if at the end of the year it comes down to a few points, he's going to look back on this and really regret it. And not only that, as I mentioned earlier, he's also been handed 3 penalty points, meaning he's now on 11, so if he just gets 1 point in the next few races, he could be looking at a race ban. So the big question is, was that penalty justified and was it too light? Looking at the examples that I showed earlier, I'd say that Max kind of got off lightly here. Seb got a 10-second stop and go, and Schumacher even got disqualified from the championship. Obviously, the Schumacher one, the context there is very, very different, so we can't really look at that incident in isolation. That needs to be considered the context. And don't forget, Max wasn't the only driver to get a penalty that race. Ollie Behrman also got 10 seconds for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. The same penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage and just driving into the side of another driver. It just doesn't make any sense. Personally, I think it should have been a stop-go penalty for Max. On commentary, Nico Rosberg was saying that it should have been a black flag. And I've seen a lot of discourse online about fans saying that he should get a race ban for Canada. I don't particularly agree with that. I don't think that a race ban is really necessary. But I do think that Max got off very lightly here, and it maybe should have been a stop and go or a drive-through penalty at least. Because I feel like this does set a bit of a dangerous precedent. If leaving the track and gaining an advantage is 10 seconds. And let's not forget George Russell just last weekend. He cuts the chicane at Monaco and gets a drive-through penalty. A drive-through penalty for cutting a chicane versus 10 seconds for driving into someone. I think the FIA need to look very, very closely at this and decide on a very clear and very harsh penalty for if this does happen again. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. Was it justified? Was it too light? Or was it too harsh? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this, but please try and keep it as civil as we can. I don't want my comment section to turn into World War III. And if you're new here, please consider dropping a subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you along. I'm only 100 subscribers away from hitting 1500, which I'll be doing a Formula 1 cap giveaway, so make sure that you subscribe and comment your favourite team so I know which hat to send you out if you win the competition. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.